German Shepherd was lying still in the middle of the road. What the baby girl did next left everyone in tears. If you think love is just a word, wait till you hear what this little girl did when she found him lying there, helpless, hopeless, and nearly gone. Her next move turned a tragedy into a miracle that people still talk about today. This story will move you. Like, share, and let us know where you're listening from. On a quiet, sun-drenched afternoon in a small town where everyone knows each other's names, the world seemed to slow down. The gentle hum of everyday life, children playing, neighbors chatting, was interrupted by something unusual, something that made even the busiest passerby pause. There, right in the middle of the narrow road, lay a German Shepherd. Not moving, not breathing, or at least that's what it looked like. Cars approached cautiously, their tires crunching softly on the gravel, but no one dared to stop. They slowed down, eyes fixed on the still figure, uncertain, afraid to disturb. Was the dog hurt? Was it just resting? Or worse, was it gone? The town held its breath. The usual chatter faded into a tense silence, as if everyone was silently waiting for a miracle. Mothers pulled their children close. Drivers glanced nervously at the road, caught between urgency and fear. It was as though time had folded in on itself. And then, amidst all this hesitation, something remarkable happened. A little girl, no older than 3, clutching her mother's hand tightly, suddenly let go. Without hesitation, she took a few determined steps forward. Her tiny feet pattered softly on the pavement as she walked straight toward the motionless dog. The crowd watched, hearts pounding, as the innocence of a child confronted the mystery of pain and silence. Her mother's voice trembled, calling after her gently, "Come back, sweetheart." But the girl kept moving. It was as if she saw something beyond the stillness, something the adults had missed. A spark of hope flickering in her wide, trusting eyes. For a moment, the world stood still, watching this tiny figure against the vastness of the quiet street. The sunlight glimmered on the dog's fur. The girl's shadow stretched long and thin beside him. The breath of the town caught in one collective gasp. What happened next? What did the little girl do that left everyone in tears? That moment, frozen in time, would change more than just a day in this small town. It would change lives forever. Nestled between rolling hills and shaded by towering oaks, the small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your story. Streets lined with maple trees whispered secrets of generations past, and neighbors stopped by just to share a cup of coffee or check on one another. Life moved gently here, with the steady rhythm of simplicity and care. In this close-knit community lived little Emma, a bright-eyed 3-year-old with curly hair that bounced every time she laughed. Emma was known by everyone, not just for her infectious smile, but also for the gentle way she treated every creature she met. From the neighborhood cats to the sparrows nesting in the old elm tree, she spoke to them as if they understood every word. Emma's family was like many others in Willow Creek, a loving home filled with warmth and laughter. But recently, their house had felt a little quieter. A few weeks earlier, Emma's beloved golden retriever, Max, had passed away. Max wasn't just a pet, he was Emma's best friend, her shadow, and her comfort during sleepless nights. His absence left a hole in her small heart, and although her parents tried to shield her from the grief, Emma felt the loss deeply, often sitting by the empty spot where Max used to rest, whispering stories as if hoping he could still hear her. The loss made Emma's connection with animals even more profound. She didn't just see them as pets or creatures, she felt their joys and their pains as if they were part of her own family. Not far from Emma's home lived a German Shepherd named Shadow. Unlike Max, Shadow's story was much darker. Once a proud family dog, Shadow had been a loyal guardian and companion to the Harris family. But when the Harrises had to move suddenly to a city far away, Shadow was left behind. They couldn't take him along, and the family's hurried departure meant Shadow was abandoned, left to fend for himself on unfamiliar streets. 4 months, Shadow wandered the outskirts of town, growing thinner and weaker with each passing day. The friendly dog who once greeted guests with a wagging tail now avoided humans, scarred by the sudden loss and betrayal. But despite his suffering, Shadow never lost his gentle spirit. Townsfolk would occasionally spot him resting beneath the old bridge or scavenging near the marketplace. Some tried to help, but Shadow's trust was fragile, years of loyalty had been broken, and it would take more than kind words to heal his wounded heart. Yet, even in his solitude, Shadow's eyes held a flicker of hope, a longing for the days when he was loved and safe. On the morning that would change everything, Emma woke up with a feeling she couldn't explain, a tug in her heart that urged her outside. Maybe it was Max's memory guiding her, or perhaps a child's intuition that senses what others cannot. Whatever it was, Emma's world was about to collide with Shadow's in a way no one could have predicted. Two souls, both carrying their own stories of loss and longing, were about to meet on that quiet town road. And in that meeting lay the start of something extraordinary. It was a quiet spring morning in Willow Creek, the kind of morning where the sun peeks gently over the horizon and bathes everything in a soft golden light. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and dew-kissed grass. The streets were calm, and the town seemed to breathe slowly, untouched by the rush of the outside world. Emma, a bright-eyed 3-year-old, was holding tightly onto her mother's hand as they strolled down the familiar path near their home. Birds chirped softly in the trees above, and the distant laughter of children playing reached their ears like a comforting melody. But on this otherwise ordinary day, something happened that would mark the town's heart forever. As they neared the bend in Maple Street, Emma's gaze was drawn to something unusual lying in the middle of the road. It was a large German shepherd, motionless and still as stone. The dog's once proud frame was stretched out on the rough pavement, his fur dulled and matted with dust and dirt. His eyes, half closed and weary, seemed to tell a story of pain and neglect. A hush fell over the neighborhood as curious onlookers slowed their cars, their engines fading to an almost silent hum. No one dared approach the dog. Some whispered worriedly among themselves, while others stared in stunned silence, unsure what to do. The dog lay there as if waiting for something or someone, but the townspeople, caught between fear and uncertainty, kept their distance. Some feared the dog might be dangerous, others felt helpless, unwilling to disturb what might have been the last moments of a loyal friend's life. Cars slowed and stopped nearby, but nobody got out to help. The quiet street seemed frozen in time, holding its breath. But little Emma, with her innocent heart and fearless spirit, saw things differently. Her small hand slipped free from her mother's grasp, and without hesitation, she took a step forward. Her bright eyes locked onto the dog as if she understood something that no one else could. Her tiny feet tapped gently on the pavement, steady and sure, as she moved closer. Her mother's voice trembled as she called after her, "Emma, come back." But the child was already drawn by a force beyond words, a silent connection that pulled her toward the hurting animal. The crowd watched in a mix of shock and awe as the little girl continued on, inching closer to the dog with a tenderness that only a child could muster. As Emma knelt beside the German shepherd, she gently reached out her hand and touched his rough, dusty fur. The dog's breathing was shallow, but as her small fingers made contact, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, the pain seemed to soften, replaced by a flicker of recognition and relief. The world around them faded, leaving just the child and the dog connected in a fragile moment of hope. The bystanders, who had been frozen in fear and hesitation, were moved to tears by the scene unfolding before them. Some whispered prayers, others wiped their eyes as they witnessed the pure innocence of a child breaking through the veil of suffering. A man nearby pulled out his phone, capturing the tender moment of the child comforting the wounded dog, a moment that would soon touch hearts far beyond their small town. Emma's voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but filled with an undeniable strength. "It's okay," she said gently. "You're not alone anymore." Her words, simple yet profound, seemed to wrap around the dog like a warm blanket. The dog shifted slightly, leaning into the comfort of the child's touch. His eyes, once dull and tired, now held a glimmer of trust. Emma's mother hurried forward and embraced her daughter, tears streaming down her cheeks. In that quiet street, surrounded by a crowd that had been strangers moments ago, a bond was forged, a bond of compassion, courage, and hope. Time seemed to pause, the street holding its breath for what would come next. It was a day that would be remembered, a story told and retold, about how a little girl's bravery and kindness breathed life back into a broken soul. Emma's tiny hand rested softly on the coarse fur of the German Shepherd. At first, the dog didn't move, his body still stiff with exhaustion and pain. His breathing was shallow, uneven, like the fading echo of a heart that had endured too much. But as Emma's gentle fingers traced a slow, soothing line down his side, a subtle change came over him. His heavy eyelids fluttered open just enough to reveal a pair of deep, soulful eyes filled not with anger, but with a quiet, weary trust. The dog didn't growl or snap. There was no sign of fear or aggression, only the tired acceptance of someone who had waited far too long for kindness. Emma looked directly into those eyes, her own filled with pure compassion and innocence beyond her years. "It's okay," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a breath carried on the gentle spring air. "You're not alone." Those simple words seemed to bridge the gap between them, an unspoken promise that the dog's suffering would not go unnoticed, that he would no longer face the world by himself. Emma's mother watched, stunned but steady, as her daughter knelt beside the injured animal, a small beacon of hope in the midst of uncertainty. The crowd that had been frozen in place moments before now began to stir. Murmurs of relief and concern rippled through the gathering, as people's hearts opened to the sight of the little girl's courage and the dog's fragile response. A man stepped forward, pulling out his phone to record the unfolding scene, knowing this moment carried a story that deserved to be shared. Nearby, a woman dialed for help, her voice steady but urgent as she explained the situation to the animal rescue team. Despite the growing activity around them, Emma remained focused on the dog, speaking softly and calmly as if to soothe not just his body but his weary spirit. "You're safe now," she said, brushing her fingers lightly across his matted fur. "I'm here with you." Her mother finally reached her side, kneeling gently beside Emma and wrapping an arm protectively around her shoulders. Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of pride and heartache flooding through her. It was a moment of pure connection, not just between mother and child, but between two souls touched by hardship, brought together by the simplest act of compassion. The German Shepherd shifted slightly, leaning into Emma's touch as if drawing strength from the small warmth beside him. His tail, once limp and lifeless, gave a faint, tentative wag, a fragile sign of hope amidst the pain. The crowd's collective breath seemed to release as a quiet wave of relief passed through them. Neighbors who had been strangers just moments earlier now exchanged knowing glances and soft smiles. In that shared silence, they recognized something profound, the power of innocence to heal and the enduring loyalty that animals offer without condition. Emma's eyes shone with a gentle determination as she continued to speak to the dog, telling him stories of a safe place, of love and kindness that awaited him beyond the road where he had suffered. Her words were simple, but filled with the deep empathy that only a child's heart can hold. "We'll take care of you," she promised softly, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to reach into the dog's very soul. Around them, the world began to move again, voices softened, steps approached with purpose, and the first responders arrived, ready to carry the German Shepherd to safety. But for Emma, this was more than just a rescue. It was the beginning of a bond forged in the quiet courage of a child's touch and the quiet resilience of a dog's spirit. As the dog was carefully lifted into the waiting vehicle, Emma pressed her small hand to his head one last time, whispering, "You're going to be okay." The dog's eyes closed gently, comforted by the presence of this brave little girl who saw him not as lost or broken, but as a friend in need. The crowd slowly dispersed, many wiping away tears, touched by the scene they had witnessed, a moment when innocence met loyalty and hope blossomed in the heart of a small town. It was a story that would live in the memories of Willow Creek's residents for years to come, a testament to the quiet power of love in the face of pain. The distant wail of sirens broke through the quiet hum of the town as the animal rescue team arrived at the scene. Dressed in their familiar uniforms, their faces calm but determined, they stepped out of their vehicle with gentle urgency. Everyone watched as they approached the German Shepherd lying in the middle of the road, their movements practiced but tender. The dog, sensing the new presence, gave a weak lift of his head but made no attempt to move on his own. The rescuers spoke softly to the dog, their voices a mix of reassurance and calm professionalism. One of them carefully knelt beside the dog and began checking his vitals, gently feeling for a pulse and examining his battered body. It was clear that the dog was malnourished, his ribs visible beneath his dusty coat, and that he carried several scrapes and bruises from his days wandering alone. But beneath all the pain, there was a flicker of life, a stubborn will to survive that the rescuers recognized immediately. Emma stood close by, her small hands still clutching her mother's as she watched every move. She refused to be separated from the dog, her heart already tethered to his in a way no one could explain. When one of the rescuers suggested Emma stay back for her own safety, she shook her head vigorously. "I want to go with him," she insisted, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling around them. Her mother looked at her, torn between worry and pride. But in that moment, there was no stopping Emma's determination. The rescuers exchanged a knowing glance and nodded. They would allow the little girl to accompany them to the shelter, understanding that this was more than just a rescue mission. It was the beginning of a healing journey for both the dog and the brave child who had reached out to him. Carefully, the rescue team lifted the German Shepherd onto a soft stretcher. His body was fragile, his muscles weak from hunger and exhaustion, but he made no protest. Emma knelt beside him, whispering words of comfort as he was gently placed in the back of the rescue vehicle. The ride to the shelter was quiet, the only sounds being the soft hum of the engine and Emma's whispered promises to her new friend. At the shelter, veterinarians and staff awaited the arrival of the injured dog. They immediately began their examination, carefully assessing his condition. The German Shepherd was diagnosed with mild dehydration, several minor wounds, and severe malnutrition. But most importantly, the vets confirmed that with proper care and time, the dog was far from beyond saving. Emma was allowed to stay close, her presence a soothing balm to the frightened animal. Over the next few days, she visited him daily, sitting beside his kennel and talking softly, her voice a constant source of calm. She brought small treats, stroked his fur gently, and never once wavered in her belief that he would recover. The staff marveled at the bond forming between the two. The dog, who had once been distant and wary, began to respond with gentle tail wags and soft whines. Emma's visits became the highlight of his days, the moments when he felt safe enough to rest and heal. The community watched this unfolding story with growing hope. Emma's unwavering care and the dog's slow but steady recovery became a symbol of resilience and the transformative power of kindness. Stories spread about the little girl who refused to leave the injured dog alone, reminding everyone that compassion can change lives, even those most broken. As weeks passed, the German Shepherd grew stronger. His coat began to regain its shine, and his eyes sparkled with newfound vitality. But through it all, it was Emma's gentle heart that remained his greatest medicine. Days turned into weeks, and with each sunrise, the fragile German shepherd grew stronger. The shelter, once filled with uncertainty and quiet worry, now echoed softly with renewed hope. Shadow, as Emma had lovingly named him, began to rediscover the simple joys of life, slowly at first, but steadily. At first, Shadow barely had the strength to lift his head. He would rest quietly in his kennel, eyes half closed, as if the world had grown too heavy for his weary frame. But Emma's daily visits were a light in his darkness. She would arrive each morning, clutching her small hand around a soft toy or a treat, and greet him with the same warmth and tenderness as a long-lost friend reunited. "Good morning, Shadow," she'd say with a smile, her voice gentle and full of promise. Gradually, Shadow began to respond. The once empty gaze in his eyes brightened. His tail, which had lain limp and lifeless, started to twitch at the sound of Emma's voice. At first, it was just a flicker. A brief wag that spoke volumes of trust slowly rekindled. Shelter workers noticed the change too, often pausing their work to watch Emma and Shadow share quiet moments of connection. It was clear that their bond was healing more than just a broken body. It was mending a wounded spirit. With the careful attention of the shelter's veterinarians and Emma's unwavering presence, Shadow's appetite returned. Meals once taken hesitantly were now eaten with eager gusto. Each bite was a small victory, a step closer to the lively dog he had been before his hardships. Emma would cheer softly every time Shadow finished his food, her face lighting up with pride. "You're getting stronger, Shadow," she'd whisper, running her fingers gently over his fur. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the windows, Shadow made an even bigger leap. With a tentative wobble, he stood on unsteady legs for the first time in what felt like forever. The shelter was filled with quiet gasps of encouragement as Shadow tested his balance, supported by the gentle hands of the caretakers. Emma clapped her hands joyfully, her eyes sparkling. "You did it! You're standing!" she exclaimed, her voice full of wonder. As the days progressed, Shadow's strength grew. He began to explore the shelter's yard, his steps more confident, his tail wagging freely like a banner of newfound happiness. Emma would run alongside him, laughing as they played a simple game of chase, her tiny feet pounding the soft grass. Their laughter mingled with the gentle rustling of leaves, a soundtrack of healing and hope. The shelter staff and community were deeply moved by Emma's commitment. Her love and patience were extraordinary, especially for someone so young. Volunteers often spoke of how her visits inspired them, reminding everyone that even the smallest acts of kindness could have the biggest impact. The story of the little girl and the abandoned dog spread through Willow Creek, touching hearts far beyond the shelter walls. Emma's family, too, was touched by the transformation. They watched as Emma's grief over losing Max softened, replaced by a growing sense of purpose and joy. Shadow became more than a dog to the family. He became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the healing power of love. By the time Shadow was ready to leave the shelter, the bond between him and Emma was undeniable. They were no longer just a little girl and a dog. They were companions, friends bound by a journey of hardship and healing. Emma's quiet courage had breathed new life into Shadow, and in return, his loyalty and affection filled the empty spaces in her heart. The day finally came when Shadow was ready to leave the shelter and begin his new life, not just as a rescue dog, but as a beloved member of Emma's family. The journey they had shared, from pain and fear to healing and hope, had woven a bond that no one could break. Emma's parents had watched the transformation with awe and gratitude. They had seen how their little girl, still so young and tender, had carried the weight of loss and turned it into a beautiful act of love. When they agreed to adopt Shadow, it was more than just giving him a home. It was an embrace of resilience, a commitment to healing not just a dog's wounds but their own hearts as well. The adoption day was filled with quiet joy. Emma held Shadow's collar tightly as they walked out of the shelter together. The dog, once weary and broken, now moved with a gentle confidence, his eyes bright and curious. He looked up at Emma as if to say thank you, not just for saving him, but for seeing him when others had only looked away. Back at their cozy home in Willow Creek, Shadow quickly settled into his new life. Nights were no longer lonely and cold. Instead, Shadow curled up beside Emma's bed every night, a silent guardian and constant companion. The soft rise and fall of the child's breathing and the gentle thump of the dog's tail became the rhythm of their peaceful nights. Emma often whispered to Shadow before drifting off to sleep, telling him stories of the day's adventures and promising that he would never be alone again. But the story didn't end there. Shadow's rescue and adoption touched more than just one family. It touched an entire community. In the days and weeks that followed, the people of Willow Creek found themselves looking at their world through new eyes. The small town, already known for its kindness, grew even more compassionate. Neighbors checked in on each other more often, and the local animal shelter saw an increase in volunteers inspired by Emma's bravery and love. Conversations began to shift, too. Stories of loneliness, neglect, and hardship no longer stayed in the shadows. They were shared openly, reminding everyone that sometimes the greatest struggles are hidden just beneath the surface. And in these stories, there was always a glimmer of hope, a reminder that kindness can heal even the deepest wounds. Emma's family found new ways to give back, organizing community events to raise awareness about animal welfare and the importance of compassion. Shadow became a gentle ambassador for second chances, his presence a living testament to what love and patience could achieve. As the narrator reflecting on this journey, it's clear that sometimes the smallest hearts see the biggest pain. Emma's innocence and courage broke through barriers of fear and indifference. She showed a community and the world that even in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness can light the way. So, maybe next time you see someone lying still in the middle of life's road, whether it's a person or an animal, take a moment to stop. Look closely. You might just be the one to bring hope when it's needed most. Because in the end, it's those moments of connection, compassion, and courage that change lives, and sometimes save them. In every story, there's a lesson waiting to be discovered. What did you learn today? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more. Keep seeking the mysteries that life has to offer.